Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Cape Falcon Kayak, and welcome to another video in our small boat camping series where I show you how to camp efficiently out of skin-on-frame kayaks and canoes. Although honestly, this information is going to be useful for anyone who's interested in learning how to pack lighter and faster and go camping without sacrificing too much comfort. So first up here, if you haven't watched the first video in this series, make sure you go back and do that now, because that's where I give you a general overview of all the specific items that you're going to be seeing in these later videos, and we pack all of that into one of my skin-on-frame sea kayaks. That way you can see how this whole thing ultimately comes together. Also, if you learn something from these videos, all I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe button, consider building one of our skin-on-frame boats, or buying your next piece of paddling gear from us. Okay, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about camp cookware and camp stoves. I'm going to show you the cook set that I've been using for years and also some of my more recent upgrades. Now, I've also got a variety of different alcohol stoves to show you and talk about how that technology has evolved over the last 15 years. And then finally, I cannot wait to show off my absolute new favorite camp stove, which runs on nothing but sticks and twigs. All right, so starting out with my cook set, I've got most everything I need nested in this Snow Peak Trek 1400. This is a 1.5 quart titanium pot, so pretty big by backpacking standards, but the reason that I like this particular pot size is because it's big enough to do a reasonable amount of cooking and not get frustrated, and it's a good size for 2 people, and I'm usually camping with my partner. So opening this thing up here, you see I've got all this stuff nested inside. Got a little salt shaker here. Got some cooking oil. It's actually shampoo right now, but it's supposed to be cooking oil. Got a couple of plastic sporks. I've got my alcohol stove and windscreen, which I'm going to show you guys a little bit later. I've got yet another spare lighter. If you've been watching this series, you know that I've got a lighter just about everywhere in my kit. And then I've got this little camp cup right here. And I'm gonna be honest, if I'm not camping in a pack raft or a whitewater kayak, I'm not bringing this cup. I'm gonna bring this cup instead, because even though this is a little bit heavier, it's a lot nicer cup of coffee or cup of tea at night, and it doesn't immediately cool off on you. And believe it or not, this actually does fit inside of here with all the rest of this stuff. Now, speaking of things I may or may not be bringing with me, just depending on what type of boat that I'm in, if I'm in a canoe or a sea kayak where I have a little bit more room, oftentimes I will bring a little plastic cutting board like this one right here and a little chef knife as well, because in those type of situations, I'm also more likely to be bringing slightly heavier food, maybe some cabbage, carrots, beets, something I can make a salad out of. On the other hand, if I'm in a pack raft or a whitewater kayak where we need to minimize every single ounce, I'm not going to be bringing those heavier vegetables, so I don't need to do the prep. And for most of my other cooking needs, I can just use either the vest knife on my PFD or just the knife on my Leatherman right here. Now, coming back to this titanium pot here, just to talk a little bit more about how I use this. In the morning time, I will usually fill this up to about 1 1/3 quarts of water, and then that takes about 10 minutes to boil on my alcohol stove. And then I take about half that water and I use it to make coffee, and then I take the other half of that water and I just put oatmeal and raisins and walnuts in there directly. And then in the evening time, I can pour a whole thing of macaroni and cheese in here, along with maybe a tuna fish packet, or maybe I'm making something with rice and a little bit of beef, and I can fill this whole thing up with food. But then when we actually go to eat, I can scoop half of it out into the lid right here. So my partner can eat out of this, I can eat out of that. It's just really convenient compared to working with a much smaller pot like this tiny little camp titanium pot right here. So this is another choice. This little pot here, I actually just bought this to work with a new stove that I have. And this is about half the volume of that other pot. You can fit about 3/4 of a quart comfortably, a little bit more than that if you want to go all the way to the top. And if you're out camping solo and you want to save every last bit of weight, this can not only be your food pot, you can just use this as your drinking cup for your coffee or your tea. So for instance, you could fire up your stove, You can make a little bit of coffee, you could drink that, then you could fire up your stove again, and then you can make your oatmeal or your food, however you want to do it, and then you don't even need to have a separate cup, so that's just making things even smaller. All right, so I think that's pretty much it for cookware. Now let's move on to camp stoves. Your basic options here are going to be gas canisters, liquid fuel, alcohol stoves, S-bit solid fuel, or if you're a total weirdo like me, possibly a tiny wood stove. Now, I want to be clear from the beginning that I am an alcohol and wood stove guy these days. I started out camping with liquid fuel when I was in Boy Scouts 35 years ago, and as much fun as we had lighting our fellow Boy Scouts on fire and nearly burning down the forest, by the time I hit my 20s, homemade alcohol stoves were becoming super popular in the ultralight backpacking community. So I built one, I took it on a trip, and I really haven't looked back since. So I don't have any canister or liquid fuel stoves to show you in this video, and I also don't have any recommendations because I haven't used them for many years. But I do want to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of different stove systems before I show you my alcohol stoves and my tiny wood stove. And then if you decide that one of those systems is better for your needs, there are literally hundreds of backpacking channels here on YouTube where you can find insanely detailed comparisons of those different gas stove options. Okay, so starting out with liquid fuel stoves like white gas, or sometimes they can be set up to run on multi-fuel. These are going to be your most expensive stoves and also your heaviest stoves, but they will give you the cheapest cost on fuel. Liquid fuel stoves also boil water really fast. They generally have really good simmer control, and the flame is wind resistant. Next up, moving on to isopropane canister stoves. These are going to be your next lightest stove option, and they're usually a little bit less expensive, although the fuel cost is about 3 times as much as carrying liquid fuel. Also, just like liquid fuel, these stoves boil water really fast, they have good simmer control, and the flame is generally wind resistant. I would say of all the different options, canister stoves are going to be the easiest to use, and they're also going to be the most convenient. Now, next up we have S-bit stoves, which is basically a little cube of solid fuel. I don't really know what that's made out of, and I really don't care. This is going to be your lightest stove option, but also has the most expensive fuel cost and puts out the least amount of heat, which means that you're going to be waiting quite a while to boil a pot of water. Now, honestly, I don't really understand the appeal of S-bit, so if you're an S-bit person, please leave a comment down below and tell me what I'm missing here and why you like that type of stove. Now, another option is a tiny wood stove, and I've got a lot to say about that, so we're just going to set this aside for a minute and we'll come back to that after I show you the alcohol stoves. And then finally here we have alcohol stoves, which is what I'm the most familiar with. So alcohol stoves are going to be your second lightest stove option right after S-bit, and the fuel is also relatively inexpensive. Alcohol does put out less heat than gas, but more heat than S-bit. It probably is the safest of all the fuels, and arguably it's a little bit more renewable. I would say the biggest downsides of cooking with alcohol, at least in the past, was that the stoves themselves were not very wind resistant and you had really poor simmer control. However, there have been huge advances in alcohol stoves over the last 15 years, so what I'm going to do here is lay out all the alcohol stoves that I currently own and talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of each one of them. I want to do a quick alcohol stove cooking demonstration just so you can see how this works. So what we're going to do is start out with my oldest stove. This is a Vargo titanium alcohol stove. This is the one I bought after a couple years of just using one that I'd made out of soda pop cans. It's honestly not a very good design, but as you can see, it's served me fine for, 15 years of camping. So let's just go ahead and fill it up here. Got some alcohol in this bottle. Nice thing is that alcohol is a pretty safe fuel, so you don't have to put it in these big, heavy industrial bottles. You can just use something like this Gatorade bottle here. As long as you screw the cap on tight, it's going to be fine. So I've gone ahead and turned off the lights so you guys can see this thing work. I'm going to start out by measuring out 1 3/4 ounces of alcohol here. And one of the many downsides of this stove is you can't put less alcohol in it because the level of the alcohol sits below the priming cup and then the stove won't prime. Fortunately, that's not the case with any of the other stoves I'm going to show you. So we're going to pour this into the priming dish And then I'm going to light it on fire. And so what's happening here is this is heating up the stove, and then pretty soon here we're going to start to see little jets of flame coming out of the sides. And sometimes I find it's helpful just to splash it a little bit. Just heats it up a little bit quicker. Okay, so what you're seeing there is called letting the stove bloom. And some alcohol stove designs still need to do this. Other ones, you just light it, put your pan right on top. Depends on the design. So this particular stove has one speed, and that is called full blast. It is definitely the hottest and most aggressive stove that I own. I mentioned that this has some major design flaws. One of them is that it has no additional pot support. You just put the pot right on top of it. If you wanted to, you could get a separate stand. Also, these flames come out way too far to the side, so it's pushing a lot of heat around the pot instead of up into the pot. So I've also got this tiny little folding windscreen here that I'm going to wrap around. This is pretty much essential. If you have anything but just a breath of wind, alcohol stoves are not going to cook very well without wind protection. So at this point, with this particular stove, all I've got to do is wait for about 8 minutes, and it should bring this to a rolling boil just with that 1 3/4 ounces of alcohol. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it sounds like we got a pretty good boil going on here. Once again, this is just a little bit over a liter of water, which is just perfect for 2 people, for oatmeal and a couple cups of coffee without having to boil a second pot. So obviously not the most stable or the most efficient alcohol stove, but it still works pretty well considering that it's 15 years old. So anyways, why don't we push this out of the way here and take a look at some of the newer technology. And if you're looking for the absolute most efficient alcohol stove system, you really can't do better than this guy right here, which is called a caldera cone that's made by a company called Trail Designs. And what this is, it's an integrated pot holder and titanium windscreen. It looks pretty big, but it actually rolls up really small. Basically, you just slide it open like this and then roll it up really tight. And this is the one that is a single piece. They actually make a 2-piece one that will fit inside of your cooking pot, which is kind of nice. Personally, I just like the convenience of this single piece, and I don't need it to be as compact as possible, so I just went with the single piece one right here. So anyways, just to show you how this works, I'm not going to light it up, but basically you can take your alcohol stove of choice. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this one because it came with this. You're going to put this over top of it, and then every single one of these is custom fitted to your particular camp pot. So when you're buying one of these, you fill out a form, tell them what pot you have, and then they're going to send you one of these, and then the pot slides in like this, and you can see how this collar is perfectly fitted to be able to support the lip of your titanium pot, which holds the pot up above the alcohol stove. And what makes this thing so efficient is, one, it's just an incredible windscreen, but also having the pot all the way down inside the windscreen means that you're pushing heat from all sides into the pot, which is especially important when you're cooking with titanium because titanium loses heat really easily. So every amount of titanium pot that you have up above your windscreen is pushing heat in the wrong direction. And when you get in cold, windy conditions, that makes a big difference on boil time. I would say on average, I have found that this system boils my water with about 30% less fuel than just using any other type of windscreen system. I would say the only real downside that I've found with this system just has to do with pairing it with this specific pot. Because if you have a pot that has handles like this, as opposed to handles that come way out here, 2 things are going to happen. One, they've got to make this hole a lot bigger right here to accommodate the handles, which makes this thing less efficient. And also you get a lot of heat pouring out here, which heats the heck out of these handles, which means that you do not want to try to grab it with your hands because you're going to get burned. So my advice here is if you're setting up a stove system from scratch and you want to use the caldera cone, I would buy the style of pot that has this style of handle right here because it's going to be a little more efficient and you're going to be less likely to get burned. Now, the only other thing that I've found with the caldera cone is that it seems to like certain stoves more than others. Now, the stove that actually comes with it, which is just this little guy right here, seems to be perfectly designed for it, which I guess isn't surprising. And the reason I mention that is because when I tried the caldera cone, with my favorite little alcohol stove, which is this Trangia Spirit Burner, it actually didn't have a very good boil time because the lip of this is a little bit too close to the bottom of the pot in here, so it doesn't have really efficient combustion. So good news is that it works just fine with the stove that they provide, and also alcohol stoves are super cheap in general, and so anytime you're cooking on alcohol, it's not uncommon to have 3 or 4 of them just sitting around the house, and you learn which systems like which stoves the best. Now, I just mentioned that this Trangia Spirit Burner is my favorite little alcohol stove, so let's just talk about that for a minute. So you can see the body of this thing is made from brass, which is a little bit heavier than titanium, but it's a whole lot cheaper at 17 bucks for one of these stoves. Or you can get one of these from Firebox Stove Company, where they've actually soldered the underside of the lip right here, which is a common point of leaks on these stoves. And the reason that matters is this stove actually has a cap that you can put on it and tighten down. And that cap has a little O-ring inside of it. And so what that means is that you're not limited to using all the fuel that's in there and perfectly measuring out your fuel for every meal. If you want to, you can just fill this up, light it, and then when you're done cooking, you can blow it out, let it cool down. You can put the cap on nice and tight, and then you don't need to waste that fuel. You can carry that fuel over to your next cooking. Now, another thing that's cool about the Trangia is it has this simmer ring right here. And this is not the easiest thing to use because to adjust it, it's going to be hot because you're cooking on it. But how this works is you can actually put this, it just sets on top here, and then you can open it up a little bit like that. And that's going to control how much air is getting down in here, and therefore it's going to control how much combustion you get. So of all the alcohol stoves, I feel like this one has the best simmer control, even though it's a little harder to use. So if you're cooking as opposed to just boiling water, you're not just going to automatically burn your food. Now, in addition to that, at least in my experience, the Trangia burns a little bit cooler. And if you drop the pot a little bit closer, if you have that option, you can actually adjust the temperature that way as well. For example, the space between this and the bottom of the pot on that particular caldera cone was only 3/4 of an inch. And I was getting 17 minutes of burn time off of a single ounce of fuel. And that's one of the other things that is the big difference between the newer alcohol stove designs and the old stuff like the one I showed you in the beginning. There are just in general a lot more efficient. Instead of putting in almost 2 ounces of fuel to boil a pot of water, if I've got a good windscreen and I'm using the Trangia here, I can usually get that same pot boiled with between 1 ounce and 1.5 ounces. Now, before we move on here, I just want to touch on bottles and also fuel quantity. Like I said before, because alcohol is a relatively safe fuel, you don't need a super intense bottle to store it in. Quite honestly, most drink bottles that you would buy at the corner store are going to be up to the task. And if it has a 2-liter style top on it like this, it's going to be even safer. And the reason I know that is because I used to be a climber, and the standard way that we would store water was in 2-liter bottles because they were just insanely tough and it was almost impossible to break one. So, as far as the volume of fuel that you need, I have never run out of fuel on a week-long camping trip, even with my old inefficient stove, using a 1-liter or 1-quart bottle like this. So basically for a 7-day trip with a 1-liter or 1-quart bottle, that's going to give you about 4.5 ounces of fuel per day, which translates into 3 really good 10 to 15 minute burns depending on your alcohol stove, which is usually more than enough for most of the camp cooking that we're doing. So you're going to have to get to know your own cooking habits. You may need more than this. You'll probably need less than this. You can figure that out as you go. All right, so I think that pretty much covers alcohol stoves. And now I want to show you guys my absolute new favorite camp stove. But first, I want to thank you, because if I hadn't had to do a ton of research for making this video, I never would have known that this stove even existed. And now that I own one, I'm absolutely obsessed with it. And what we're talking about here is this Firebox G2 5-inch wood burning camp stove. It comes in stainless steel and it comes in titanium. I own both of them at this point. And right up front here, I do want to be honest and say that a wood burning stove is probably your least plug and play option, because you've got to find little sticks and then you've got to light a fire. However, the upside is that in most situations, you don't even need to carry any fuel, And even though it takes a little bit longer to set up, for me at least, it's actually a really fun process. So anyways, come in a little bit closer here and let's check this out. All right, so what we're looking at here is the Firebox G2 tiny wood burning stove. I got the deluxe kit, which has some useful accessories. If you buy one of these, I'd recommend just buying the kit. And the way this opens up is I've just got a couple of these little metal sticks here that they call fire sticks. We're gonna pull those off. And then there's an ash pan that it kind of locks over it like this. And then this is so cool. You just fold it open like this. And then you can see there's a bottom in there that just falls down. Stand it up. And that's pretty much ready to go as far as starting a fire inside of it. Now, I mentioned that it has this little integrated ash pan right here. So we're gonna go ahead and slide that in place. Slide it from the back side. And that's just gonna catch some of the ash and deflect some of the heat, so you're not pushing so much heat directly into the ground. Obviously, if you're in dry conditions, you are, one, going to want to make sure that fire regulations permit use of this type of stove, and two, just like with any fire, you're going to want to clean the area of combustible materials at least out to like 2 or 3 feet. So anyways, once you got this guy set up, you're going to want to make a fire inside of it, and you can do this very easily just with any random dry sticks and twigs. And the cool thing about this stove is that the little slots here that you put wood into won't actually permit you to put anything bigger than about 3/4 of an inch round in the side. So it's fairly self-limiting that way. Now, if you happen to be a woodworker, or maybe you're building one of our skin-on frame kayaks, this little stove is kind of a match made in heaven, because even if you already have a large wood stove in your house that you use to process your larger scraps, you probably know already that as woodworkers, we accumulate way more kindling than anyone could ever use in their lifetime. And the cool thing about having this little guy with its 3/4 inch limit for what it will accept here is that at the end of the day in your workshop, you can take a few minutes and just process all of your offcuts into sizes that fit well with this stove. And then next time you go car camping, or maybe next time you go canoe camping, you can just throw a few handfuls of this in a dry bag. And then when you get wherever you're going, you don't even need to hunt for sticks. And also, if you can choose exactly the wood that you want to feed this, you can really dial in your cooking experience. So obviously I'm not going to light this thing on fire right now, but just to give you an idea of how I would build a fire in this, I'm going to start out with a piece of paper crumpled up, or maybe a little chunk of fire starter, or maybe some planer shavings. I'm going to throw those in the bottom and grab a little handful of tiny twigs or tiny offcuts from my workshop, put them on top, light it with a lighter, wait for a minute or two for it to really get burning. And then once that's really firing, I can grab the bigger sticks and feed them from both sides. And what I have found personally is my favorite is I like to cut sticks of hardwood that are 5/8 of an inch square by 12 inches long. And I'm going to feed 2 of them side by side through here, like this. And then I'm going to feed 2 more of them side by side through here like this. So looking down inside the firebox here, you can see that just by restricting the size of the openings on the side, they've made it so you can't overfeed the stove with too big of wood or too much wood, which helps to maintain kind of a perfect balance of wood surface area to oxygen in here, and it just makes a perfectly sustained little burn inside of this stove. And the other cool thing about it is if you're using long sticks, or sticks that you've made like these ones right here, you can really micro adjust the temperature just by how you feed the stove. So once I've got a good fire going in here, if I want to boil water and get the maximum heat, I'm just going to keep pushing these sticks in as much as I can. However, if I want to cook a little bit slower, I can maybe let one of the sticks burn down but keep pushing in the other stick. Or let's say I just want to slow cook for a long period of time. Maybe I'm cooking a trout on top of this. In that case, I'm going to let all the sticks burn down and I'm going to push them in really slowly, and that way I can cook on a nice slow heat. Now, if you're wondering about the efficiency of cooking on something like this, just to give you an example, like I said, these 4 sticks are hardwood, 5/8 of an inch square and 12 inches long. And I counted about 20 total minutes of cook time before all of this was burned down. So that basically means that with just this much wood right here, you can cook an entire meal for 2 people. So really, that's pretty efficient. I mean, definitely way more efficient than just having an open campfire and trying to put a pot or a pan on the top of it. And if you're not camping for too many days, or if you're car camping, it's really pretty practical to bring wood from home. And another thing that's worth mentioning is that in addition to cooking on this thing, it's also just kind of a nice little campfire. I mean, definitely not as nice as having a full-size campfire, but I would say that it's about 75% as nice as a full-size campfire, but it uses probably 1/20th of the resources in the process. So anyways, moving on to actually cooking on this thing. Let's say you want to boil water or fry up some food. You can see these little fire sticks, little metal sticks I showed you earlier. These can be slotted into all kinds of locations in this stove for different reasons. But first, we're just going to start by putting them on the top here like this. So you can see that makes kind of a stand, and I can put my regular camp pot on top of it here. And surprisingly, it actually works really well with full-size pots and pans as well. So you can see here, I mean, that's just a standard saucepan from the kitchen, and this thing is super stable on top of here. Also, if you want to raise it up a little bit more, they have a different kind of stick here that has these little protrusions, and you can put these in just like this. And that raises it up a little bit higher, gets a little bit better heat flow around the bottom of the pan. So in addition to just cooking on top of it like this, there's also a lot of really cool accessories. And if you just buy the basic stove, it's not going to have any of this stuff. It's just going to come with what you see here and a couple of these little metal sticks. But if you buy the deluxe kit with everything, you're going to get this really cool grill right here. So you can see this fits like this. And I mean, granted, this is pretty tiny, but you could absolutely cook a mid-sized trout on this, or a couple of hamburgers. And once again, you can really carefully control the heat just by how you feed this thing. So you could slow barbecue something if you wanted on top of this, if you had something to put over it. Now, in addition to this grill right here, there is also a raised fire grate. So this is basically another floor that you can fit down inside of here. And the reason you might want to do this is if you wanted to raise up a bed of coals to kind of maybe slow cook something, or if you wanted to put an alcohol stove down inside of here. So just to give you an idea how this works, I'm going to go ahead and take these sticks and I'm going to put them through the side here. And you can see this thing is just perforated with little holes, and that's on purpose because it lets you hold this floor at many different heights. So once I've done that, you can see that that floor is sitting right there. And then I can just grab an alcohol stove, drop it in here like that, and then you can put the other fire sticks right here, and you can cook on top of it just like you would with any alcohol stove. And you can see this side flips up here, so it actually becomes a really good wind screen. That way you've got wind protection, which is pretty essential if you're using alcohol stoves. Now, also, this thing has what they call a boil ring, which is sized to fit a specific small camp pot. And to use that, you would actually lower this plate down here. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick a couple of these fire sticks through a little bit lower. And the reason you want to have all these different slots in the side is, especially if you are using this with an alcohol stove, you want to try to maintain that distance of about 1.5 to 1.25 inches to the bottom of the pot. So there's plenty of versatility. So we're just going to go ahead and pull out some of these sticks, let the floor drop down a little bit deeper. And then I can take the remaining 2 fire sticks and stick them through here, like this. And then we can take this plate, which they call a boil ring, and we're gonna clip this in place. And what this is designed to do is to accept a really common size camp pot. This is the mini camp pot I showed you earlier that holds about 3/4 of a cup of water. And this sort of serves the same function of the caldera cone. It makes sure that more of the heat is going around the bottom and the sides of the pot. That way it heats up faster. And then of course we can close this little windscreen right here. So overall, this is just a brilliant little device. I mean, as far as just being an alcohol stove, I think this is a pretty darn heavy windscreen, but considering that it does have so much versatility, you can use it with your alcohol stove, you can use it with sticks and twigs, and if you spend the money to buy the one that's made out of titanium, it only weighs 1 pound, which I think is pretty reasonable considering everything that it can do. Now, just a quick side note about this boil plate right here. As of right now, July 2025, Firebox is going through a transition on the size of pots that they're going to be carrying compared to what they had before. And so what that means is that if you get one of these right about this time and you buy one of these pots off their website, it might not perfectly fit down in here. So I spoke to the people at Firebox. This is a known issue. It's going to be solved very quick. You probably won't even have to deal with it. But if you find yourself in the circumstance that I found myself in yesterday, where this plate was about 1/10 of a millimeter too small, it was really easy. All I had to do is grab my Dremel tool with a sanding wheel, went around the inside of this a few times, and then pot drops in there just fine. All right, so that is the Firebox G2 tiny wood burning stove. Maybe not the right option for everyone, but still an extremely cool piece of kit. Keep in mind, we just scratched the surface of what this thing can do in this video. And when I find some time, next time I'm out camping, I'm definitely gonna make an entire video just dedicated to this stove and all of its features, and maybe even do a cooking demonstration for you guys. So, I think that's pretty much it for this video covering camp cookware, camp stoves, and like I say every time, if you're an experienced small boat camper and you have your own recommendations for any of these products, please leave them in the comments below, because I think it would be really cool if the comment section on these videos could serve as a resource for people looking to get into this type of camping. Also, as usual, if you like this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. And don't forget to check out our website, CapeFalconKayaks.com, where I have skin-on-frame building video courses, plan sets, and various free skin-on-frame resources. You can also find us on Instagram, @CapeFalconBuilds, where we post photos and videos of whatever we're working on in the shop or whatever we're testing out on the water. And you can find that same content on the Cape Falcon Kayak Facebook page as well. So that's it for now. Take care. Be safe on the water. I will see you next time.